On the 24th of February 2022, Russia launched a military invasion of Ukraine. And a whole year later, there's still no end in sight.
Паника, страх.
I feel panic, scared and excited. I don't know who I should ask for help. It's scary. We didn't believe that this situation would come.
According to data from the Institute for the Study of War, Russia controls more than 103,000 square kilometres, or about 17% of the entire country, in areas from Crimea to Kherson, up the eastern border to Luhansk. But Ukrainian forces have been slowly forcing the Russians out. All of this at the expense of the safety of millions and the lives of thousands. The whole situation isn't how anybody wanted it to be, including Russia's President Vladimir Putin. So now he's stepped up the stakes. At the annual State of the Nation address in front of Russia's political and military elite, Putin blamed the West for the war and made the announcement that his country would suspend its participation in the New START nuclear weapons reduction treaty.
I'm forced to announce today that Russia is suspending its participation in the Strategic Offensive Arms Treaty.
This has caused quite a stir, because the New START treaty is basically the safety barrier that prevents the world from all-out nuclear war. Despite the name, the START treaty isn't actually new, and neither are nuclear threats. See, after the first nuclear weapons were dropped over Japan by the US at the end of World War II in 1945, it kind of opened the floodgates for other countries to start developing their own nuclear weapons, and the nuclear arms race kicked off. The Soviet Union, which included what we now know as Russia, was the second country to successfully develop and test a nuclear weapon in 1949. And in the years and decades following, the likes of the UK, France, China and India also got on the nuclear bandwagon. You know, not wanting to be left behind. Since the very first nuclear weapons in 1945 and the destruction they created, there's been the general consensus that they're a bit dangerous, hey? So experts and government officials worldwide have long campaigned to limit or ban their use altogether. Way back in 1946, the UN called for complete elimination. Then in 1958, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament was formed, which introduced one of the most iconic peace symbols ever created. A year later, in 1959, nuclear tests were banned in Antarctica. Then in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis saw the US and Soviet Union knocking on the door of nuclear war, after the US discovered a Soviet nuclear missile ready to launch in their neighbouring country of Cuba. Both countries were equally spooked by the thought of the destruction that could very easily have happened. So the US and Soviet officials broke out their finest pens and in 1963 signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which banned the testing of nuclear weapons underwater, in the atmosphere or outer space, as well as pledging to work towards eventual complete disarmament and an end to the nuclear arms race.
To make clear our good faith and solemn convictions on this matter, I now declare that the United States does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere so long as other states do not do so.
This was kind of the origin story for the START Treaty, an agreement between the two biggest nuclear superpowers to chill out on the big boomy things a bit. Although other countries were getting around the development of their own nuclear weapons, it was super important for the US and Soviet Union to come to some sort of agreement, because they were responsible for the vast majority of the world's nukes. In fact, even to this day, the US and Russia own around 90% of all the nuclear weapons in existence. The START Treaty is a more modern and strict version of those nuclear truces from the mid-century. The first START, aptly named START 1, was signed in 1991 by then US President George H.W. Bush and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. and introduced radical reductions to the country's nuclear stockpiles, rather than just limitations.
We signed the START Treaty as testament to the new relationship emerging between our two countries and the promise of further progress toward lasting peace.
Later that year, the Soviet Union broke up, leaving 4 independent republics with nuclear weapons. Those being Belarus, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and of course, Russia. All of these new independent nations re-signed and restarted the START 1 agreement in 1994. And by 1997, Belarus and Kazakhstan had gotten rid of all of their weapons, with the US and Russia drastically reducing their stockpiles from around 11,000 warheads to just 7,950. Ukraine also got rid of all of their weapons by 1999. Over the next couple of decades, the START Treaty was updated to further tighten the rules and reduce the number of weapons, which eventually culminated in the introduction and signing of New START in 2010 by US President Barack Obama and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev.
This day demonstrates the determination of the United States and Russia, the two nations that hold over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, to pursue responsible global leadership.
The New START Treaty has carried through to today. Well, sort of. See, part of the START's rules from its beginning in 1991 is each country's right to inspect each other's nuclear weapons to make sure they're following the rules. But in 2020, inspections were put on hold because of the pandemic, and they just haven't happened since. So the treaty hasn't quite been working properly for the past few years. But Russia's decision to suspend their end of the treaty did still surprise many experts around the world. But this isn't the end of the treaty.
Actually, the treaty is not going to be suspended indefinitely. According to Putin, he says it's going to be suspended temporarily.
Putin has also said he won't be the first to launch a nuclear attack, and is fully aware of the devastating consequences nuclear war would create. It's believed that Putin's decision is a diplomatic move to try and bring the big players, particularly the US, to the negotiation table, and maybe take some baby steps towards a peaceful resolution.
If the two sides, and by that I don't mean Ukraine and Russia, I mean the United States and Russia, would sit down with proper diplomacy and hear each other's positions, there is grounds for ending this conflict